A grand event was taking place in a massive auditorium, packed with thousands of people. Cameras flashed, and the air buzzed with excitement. Former President Donald Trump stood at the podium, addressing the crowd with his usual confidence. Among the sea of attendees, a small girl with bright, innocent eyes sat in the front row, clutching a microphone. Her tiny hands trembled slightly, but she was determined. She had a question, one that had been weighing on her heart for a long time. A moderator stepped forward. "All right, we have time for a few audience questions," he announced. "Let's start with this young lady here." He pointed to the little girl. The crowd grew quiet as the microphone was handed to her. She stood up on her chair so everyone could see her. Taking a deep breath, she spoke in a soft but clear voice. "Mr. Trump, do you believe in God? And do you think he still loves us even when bad things happen?" Silence filled the room. The question caught everyone off guard. Even Trump, known for his quick and bold responses, paused for a moment. His expression softened. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the genuine curiosity in the little girl's eyes. Some audience members murmured, others nodded. Trump looked at her, then glanced at the audience. This wasn't just a political question. This was something deeper, something personal. He took a deep breath. His answer wasn't just for the girl, it was for everyone watching. He leaned forward and said, "Well, sweetheart, that's a beautiful question, and let me tell you." The auditorium was silent. Every eye was on Trump, every ear waiting for his response. Even the press, usually eager to capture a headline, had paused, sensing that this moment was different. Trump looked at the little girl, his expression softer than usual. He wasn't standing as a politician now. He was standing as a man, as a father, as someone who had faced his own questions about faith. He finally spoke. "Well, sweetheart," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I absolutely believe in God. And let me tell you something, he believes in you too." The little girl's eyes widened. She clutched the microphone a little tighter. But she hesitated. "Why do bad things happen then? If God loves us, why do people get hurt? Why do families struggle?" The audience murmured. It was a question everyone had asked at some point in their lives. Trump nodded, folding his hands on the podium. He took a breath before answering. "You know, that's a question people much older than you struggle with," he said. "I've met world leaders, powerful men and women, and even they ask the same thing. But here's what I believe." He looked out into the audience. God never abandons us. Even when things are tough, even when life doesn't make sense, he's still there. Sometimes the hardest times shape us into the strongest people. The little girl blinked, taking in his words. The crowd was hanging on every syllable. Then Trump leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "And sweetheart, sometimes he sends us to be the answer to someone else's prayers." The girl's lip trembled. Tears began to form in her eyes. A hush fell over the crowd. The little girl wiped a tear from her cheek, her small hands trembling slightly as she held the microphone. Trump let the moment breathe. He wasn't rushing to fill the silence. He let the weight of his words settle. Then he spoke again. "You see, when bad things happen, it's easy to wonder if God is still watching," he said, his tone softer than usual. "But I believe he gives us strength. He gives us each other. And sometimes he even gives us a mission." The girl sniffled. "A mission?" Trump nodded. "Exactly. Sometimes we go through tough things not because God doesn't care, but because he's preparing us to be a light for someone else." The audience was captivated. Even the reporters, some skeptical, couldn't look away. The cameras zoomed in on the little girl's tearful yet thoughtful expression. "I don't always understand his plan," Trump continued. "But I do know this. When I look at you, I see hope. I see a little girl who's already asking the right questions, who wants to understand the world." The little girl took a shaky breath. "So, I should never stop believing?" Trump smiled. "Never. Because the world needs people like you, people who care, who seek truth, and who remind others to have faith even in hard times." A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. A man beside her whispered, This is powerful." The little girl looked down for a moment, taking it all in. Then she lifted her head. "Thank you, Mr. Trump," she whispered. And then something unexpected happened. She stepped forward and hugged him. For a moment, everything froze. The little girl wrapped her small arms around Trump, her face pressing against his suit. The embrace was pure, innocent, completely unexpected. The crowd gasped, cameras flashed, reporters whispered. Even Trump seemed momentarily caught off guard. But then, he did something that sent shockwaves through the room. Slowly, he returned the hug. It wasn't a politician's handshake, not a calculated gesture. It was real. Genuine. The girl sniffled again. "I just wanted to say thank you," she murmured, her voice muffled against his coat, "for telling me that God still cares." Trump patted her back gently. "He does, and you just reminded everyone of that." The silence was heavy, emotional. Even some of Trump's toughest critics in the room looked moved. The hug ended, but its impact didn't. A woman in the front row wiped away tears. A man whispered, "I never thought I'd see something like this." Then the crowd erupted. Applause, thunderous, deafening. Some people even stood, clapping, cheering, not for a president, not for politics, but for the moment. The little girl turned, looking out at the crowd, her tears now replaced with a glow. Trump leaned down. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She blinked. Then softly she answered, "Ava." Trump smiled. "Ava, I think you just reminded a lot of people that God is still with us." The cameras zoomed in. The moment was going viral, and no one, not Trump, not Ava, not the audience, had any idea what was coming next. The room was still buzzing from the emotional moment, but Ava wasn't done. She wiped her face, took a deep breath, and looked straight into Trump's eyes. "Mr. President," she said softly but with a quiet strength. Trump leaned in. "Yes, sweetheart?" Ava hesitated, glancing at the cameras, the towering reporters, the sea of expectant faces. Then she spoke. "If God is always with us," she paused, her voice shaking slightly, "why do so many people feel alone?" The room fell silent. No one had expected that. Even Trump, who had faced world leaders, tough reporters, and impossible situations, paused. His expression changed. The bravado, the political polish, it all faded for just a second. He didn't have a prepared speech for this. No script, no teleprompter, just a little girl with a question that touched millions. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped softly. A cameraman zoomed in. The weight of Ava's words hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer. Trump exhaled, glancing at the little girl, then at the audience. "That's a tough question, Ava," he admitted. His voice was quieter now, more personal. Ava waited, her wide eyes filled with hope, fear, and something deeper, longing. Trump looked out at the audience as if searching for the right words. Then, slowly, he spoke, and what he said next changed everything. The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes were on Trump. Ava's question wasn't political. It wasn't about policies or speeches. It was about the human heart. Trump leaned forward, his expression serious. For once, there were no cameras to play to, no reporters to outsmart, just a little girl waiting for the truth. He took a deep breath. "You know, Ava," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "I've met a lot of people in my life, powerful people, wealthy people, leaders of nations, but I've also met soldiers, veterans, moms and dads working 2 jobs, and do you know what they all have in common?" Ava shook her head. "They all feel alone sometimes." The audience held their breath. Even the reporters, usually waiting to twist his words, just listened. "But feeling alone," Trump continued, his voice softer now, "doesn't mean God isn't there." Ava's brow furrowed. She was listening, really listening. "Sometimes," Trump said, "God doesn't take away our loneliness. He fills it. He puts people in our lives. He gives us strength. And when we think no one is listening," he glanced at the ceiling for a moment, "He is." A tear slipped down Ava's cheek. She wasn't the only one. Across the room, grown men swallowed hard. A reporter dabbed at his eyes. Even Trump's usual critics looked moved. And then, Ava did something no one expected. She reached out and took Trump's hand. The moment would go viral. But what happened next was even more powerful. The room was still. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. Ava's hand in Trump's was a symbol of something deeper, something many had hoped for but never thought possible. The cameras flashed in rapid succession, but the moment wasn't about the optics. It wasn't about politics. It was about the profound connection between a little girl and a man who, just moments ago, many believed had lost his way. Trump's face softened as he looked down at Ava's small hand in his. The crowd, usually quick to criticize, suddenly felt moved. "Thank you, Mr. President," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible, but the sincerity was clear. Trump squeezed her hand gently. "No, Ava, thank you. You reminded me of something important today. We all need to remember that." For a moment, no one knew what to say. The energy in the room shifted. A heavy weight of expectation had been lifted, replaced by something rare, genuine human connection. Ava, still looking up at him, blinked back more tears. She didn't need to speak. Her eyes said it all. The world, for a fleeting moment, felt kinder. The cameras were still rolling. The reporters would later comment on how Trump's demeanor seemed different, warmer, more empathetic. But for now, the moment belonged to them. And as the silence stretched on, it was clear that this interaction had sparked something bigger than they could understand. Ava's question lingered in the air long after she'd spoken it. What did she mean by asking about God? What was she really trying to get at with a question so simple, yet profound? Trump stood there, his hand still holding hers. He wasn't used to feeling this kind of vulnerability on the world stage. It wasn't his usual rhetoric, the carefully constructed sound bites that got him applause. This was something different. Ava's eyes searched his face, full of innocence and curiosity. She wasn't looking for political answers. She wasn't expecting promises, policies, or grandiose speeches. She wanted truth, truth that was beyond the headlines. "Do you believe in God, Mr. Trump?" she had asked. The simplicity of it was disarming, almost childlike. But it had layers, layers that Trump didn't realize he needed to explore until now. For a moment, Trump seemed to pause, his mind racing. It wasn't that he had never thought about God before, but there was something about Ava's unguarded sincerity that made him reconsider his own beliefs, his own understanding of the divine. Had he truly ever stopped to reflect on his faith? The room, still in silence, began to feel like a pressure cooker. The crowd was waiting for his response. The nation was waiting. But what could he say that would satisfy everyone? The question wasn't about politics. It was about something deeper, something that cut across party lines. Ava looked up at him, patiently waiting, as if she had all the time in the world. And then, finally, Trump spoke. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Ava's small hand was still in Trump's, and everyone waited. Every single person was hanging on his next words. Trump wasn't used to this type of pressure. He was used to crowds cheering, people chanting his name, and applause echoing through the air. But this was different. He cleared his throat, looking down at Ava, then back at the crowd. The weight of her question wasn't lost on him. He could have easily deflected, dodged it with a joke or a political answer, but somehow he didn't want to. This little girl had asked him something so simple yet so profound, and for a moment he wasn't thinking about his campaign or his image. He was thinking about the deeper question she had raised. "Do you believe in God?" I believe in God," Trump said slowly, his voice almost a whisper. The words were not ones he said often, not like this, in front of millions of people. But there was a sincerity in the moment that made the crowd hold its breath. "I may not always be the best person, but I believe in something bigger than myself," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "And I think faith is a personal thing for everyone, but I believe it's what guides us, what helps us through the hardest times." Ava looked up at him with wide eyes, the sincerity in his words reaching her in a way she hadn't expected. She felt something shift within her, something she couldn't explain. Her eyes welled with tears, not out of pity, but because of the raw honesty that she could feel from him. He wasn't just answering for the cameras, he was answering from his heart. The room erupted in applause, but Ava stood still, holding Trump's hand as tears slowly rolled down her face. Her question had been answered, but there was so much more to what had just happened than anyone could have imagined. As the applause thundered through the room, Ava felt a strange mix of emotions. She hadn't expected this kind of reaction. She hadn't expected Trump to answer her so honestly. People were clapping for Trump, but she wasn't sure if they truly understood the significance of the moment. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about him being a former president. It was about a little girl asking a question that mattered, and him, in that moment, showing vulnerability. Trump still held her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "Thank you, Ava," he said softly, looking down at her. "You've got a lot of courage, asking such an important question. Not many adults would dare ask what you did." Ava nodded, wiping the tears from her eyes. The crowd's applause was fading, but the feeling in the air had changed. There was something powerful about that moment. Ava had asked the question many had avoided. What did God mean to him? And in his response, he had done something most people couldn't. He had opened a door to the heart of something bigger than politics, something people often forgot in the chaos of the world. Do you believe in God, Mr. Trump? The simplicity of the question echoed in Ava's mind as she looked up at him. Trump had never given an answer like that before, at least not publicly. He had been frank, raw, and deeply human in a way she hadn't imagined. And suddenly, she felt like she wasn't just a little girl in a crowd of strangers. She felt like she had just sparked something powerful, something that might ripple out far beyond this moment. As Ava stepped away from the microphone, the weight of her question still hung in the air. She could hear whispers as she walked back to her seat, some people still in awe of what had just transpired. Ava had never seen a crowd like this before, people speaking in hushed tones, discussing the powerful moment that had just unfolded. Her heart was still racing, but there was a new sense of calm that came with it. Ava glanced back at Trump, who had returned to the podium, and she could see the change in him. His usual confidence, his larger-than-life persona, was now paired with something else: vulnerability. He was no longer just a politician or a public figure. For a brief moment, he had been a person who shared a deeply personal truth. Trump cleared his throat and glanced around the room before speaking again. You know, I've been asked all sorts of questions in my life about business, politics, even personal matters. But this, he paused, as if searching for the right words. This question about God, it's something that really makes you stop and think. The crowd listened intently, hanging on to his every word. But this time, they were not just hearing a politician. They were hearing someone who was willing to embrace his humanity, someone willing to acknowledge that even leaders have their doubts, their moments of reflection. Sometimes you forget what's truly important, Trump said, his voice softer now. But moments like this, they remind you. Ava felt a rush of warmth fill her chest. She had asked the question, but now it felt like the entire room had been given a chance to reflect, to question, and to find something deeper than politics or fame. Ava sat back in her chair, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. She had expected a simple answer, maybe a rehearsed line, but not this. Not the silence, not the rawness in Trump's voice, not the vulnerability he had shown in front of thousands. Her classmates were still talking about it. Some were questioning his sincerity, others were in awe of how much the moment had changed the mood of the entire event. But Ava didn't care about what others thought. She knew that something important had happened in that room, something bigger than politics, bigger than a presidential candidate standing at a podium. What had it meant for Trump to answer her questions so candidly? Was it really just a political move, or had he genuinely been moved by her innocence? Ava had no answers, but the mystery lingered in her thoughts. At school the next day, Ava couldn't escape the whispers. Some of her classmates had seen the video. Social media was buzzing about the little girl who had asked a question that even the president couldn't dodge. Some people praised her courage, while others criticized her for being naive. But the debate wasn't what bothered Ava. It was the way it made her feel, like she had become a part of something much larger than herself. In the schoolyard, her best friend Chloe approached her. "Ava, did you really ask him about God?" she asked in disbelief. Ava nodded. "I did, and his answer was unexpected." Chloe squinted. "But isn't that like a big deal? I mean, he's the president and you just asked him something no one ever thinks to ask." Ava shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. "I don't know. I guess I thought it was important." Chloe stared at her for a long moment. "You know, Ava, you made him answer, and that means something." Ava felt a wave of warmth rush over her. She hadn't thought about it that way. Maybe, just maybe, her question had sparked something in Trump that couldn't be ignored. Maybe the whole country would start asking questions, questions that mattered. As the day wore on, Ava felt a growing sense of pride. She had done more than just ask a question. She had ignited a conversation that went beyond politics, beyond a simple answer. It was a conversation about faith, about values, and about the role of religion in the world today. And that was just the beginning. The media frenzy around Ava's question continued to intensify. But now, it wasn't just about the president's response. Ava herself had become a symbol, a young girl who dared to ask a question that others wouldn't. She began receiving messages from people all over the country, some applauding her bravery, others questioning her motives. But what struck her most were the messages from people of all faiths, sharing how her question had sparked a personal reflection. In her living room, Ava sat with her parents, watching the news. Her dad had the TV remote in his hand, flipping between channels. Every station seemed to be discussing the event. Ava's heart raced as she saw images of herself asking Trump about God, her face now recognized across the nation. "Ava, do you understand what's happening?" her mom asked, her voice filled with a mix of awe and concern. Ava looked down at her hands, unsure. "I think so. I didn't expect any of this. I just asked a question." Her dad turned off the TV and looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You didn't just ask a question. You asked something that's been on a lot of people's minds, but no one had the courage to bring it up. You've made people think, Ava." Ava's thoughts swirled. She hadn't realized the weight of her words. To her, it had just been a simple question, something she felt in her heart. But now it was clear. Her innocent curiosity had opened up a deeper conversation. At school, the reactions were mixed. Some teachers commended her for her bravery, while others were uncomfortable with the political implications of her question. But Ava didn't mind. She had asked the question for herself, not for anyone else. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she realized that her simple question had started a ripple effect. It wasn't just about politics or religion anymore. It was about the power of asking the right question at the right moment. Ava had ignited something in the hearts and minds of others, and she knew that her journey was just beginning. And somehow she knew that the impact of that one question would be felt long after the media circus had faded away. What do you think? Do you believe that one simple question can change the way we view the world? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. And if you're inspired by Ava's courage, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that makes you think, feel, and act. Join the conversation. Together, we can spark change, one question at a time.